10 years. It's been 10 years since 2015 and the release of the Order 1886, and honestly, it's just crazy to realize that it was 10 years ago. I perfectly remember the fuss and the discussions about the game when it was released, with most opinions being mostly negative or rather mixed, with people complaining about it being too much a movie-like game, with the blur, with the black bars and all the other things. And when I got my first PS4, I just didn't play, just slid it away, but I definitely remember watching reviews and general the public opinion and the atmosphere around it. Finally, I managed to play it, and I won't lie, the main reason for me to play this game was the discount in PS Store, making the game to cost $10 only. But anyway, I agree with most of the opinions that the game is a very movie-like something, but I don't really view it as something negative. Instead, this caused me to think of it in a very interesting manner. I agree that this is rather a movie than a game, but not a movie like Detroit or Heavy Rain, and not a movie like The Last of Us and Call of Duty. This is something different, and I would say it's different in a good way, being somewhat an experiment to blend the cinematography and games together. And I guess the main thought that came to me after completing the game, that developers were mostly interested and engaged in creating more a movie rather than a game. However, this played as a double-edged sword for them. On one side, they have created something magnificent and unique in its own way, such that I can't really remember a somewhat similar game to the Order 1886. On the other, I can't really understand how it was possible to make it like that, in a bad way. Let's start from the most obvious things that make the players to feel and comprehend the game as a movie, the black bars. I remember how much fuss it caused in 2015, and I don't really understand why this was the case. Yeah, using black bars in games during gameplay is not a very common thing. To be honest, I can't really remember a single game doing that from the top of my head. Usually you may see this during cutscenes, but not during gameplay. But I can't really say this is a negative thing here. I don't really understand why many people treated this as a bad thing about the game. It looks very natural here, with the game trying to look like a movie. And indeed, black bars create a very cinematic effect here by extending the field of view, or at least creating such a feeling. Especially you can feel it during some open scenes with general views when an entire landscape is presented to a player. And in these moments, this is just a stunning beauty of a very beautiful world. And in these moments, you don't look at the black bars, you don't even spot them. Actually, you don't look at them throughout the entire game. It takes you like 2 minutes to get used to them, to their presence, and later on you feel like playing a very usual game. But in the moments when you need to look at something beautiful, it subconsciously creates a very cinematic feel and you actually enjoy the image even more. I would only say that there aren't too many moments when a player is able to stop and contemplate such views. You just don't get too many opportunities to do that. But this is mostly a problem of short length of a game, not of the black bars. But later on that. By themselves, black bars are very cool here, making a great job creating an interesting cinematic feeling. And I can't even closely understand the complaints here. A similar thing with the blur. If you start thinking of this game more like of a movie, the abundant presence of blur would only highlight for you how much effort developers put into creating the cinematic feel. Just think about it this way. Usually in movies, sharpness is used to draw the viewer's attention to an object or objects. In here, you are given this tool, and once you focus on something, the object becomes sharp and clean, the way it would look in a movie. And in fact, there are many other cinema tools used for creating the feeling of watching a movie rather than actively playing it. Yeah, it may sound like I'm defending all these elements, but I can't say that removing them or doing them in any other way would do any better to the game. No, on the contrary, all these things work together in a good way to create a required movie-like feeling. I don't believe this is something unnecessary here. On top of that, I would like to highlight the film grain filter which is added at the image of the game, which also looks very good and compelling with the selected Victorian era of the game. I just personally like to look at how colors and their usage work in games and movies and what effects they bring, so it was a huge pleasure to see this here, in a very good manner. And of course, this is just impossible to avoid speaking about the graphics of the game, which is something magnificent and stunning. Honestly, it's shocking for me to realize that this kind of graphics was here 10 years ago on PS4. Each object in the game has so many details and many small things that this is actually mind-blowing. You walk around and you just get shocked every single time you look at something or inspect something. The design of guns, clothes, all the small elements and details in the interiors of rooms, furniture, these small cups and many other things, you just look at them and you just cannot realize how beautiful this is. Sometimes you see the details that you don't even expect them to be here. For example, the hands in the barometers or thermometers, whatever these are, but these are just you just don't expect it to be here. And a similar case with the characters. There are a lot of details. They are animated in a very good way. Their face animation is amazing. And it's actually very nice to look at them and watch as a movie because they are playing amazing here. As I said, this is just crazy to realize that this game was here 10 years ago, with not all the modern games in 2025 look the way the Order did in 2015. Yeah, of course, it would be correct to say that there aren't too many open scenes and locations in the game, and the game is generally pretty linear, and it obviously is easier to design such a game when it's smaller, but still, this is just an impressive amount of details and high fidelity of the game. I honestly think that developers went wild with the visual part of the game, and as I said in the beginning, unfortunately, that's played as a double-edged sword for them. Once you start speaking of the gameplay of the game directly, this becomes just appalling, because in fact the only things you can do in the game are shoot and hide, and that's it, shoot and hide and repeat. The usual flow of the gameplay in The Order 1886 looks as following. You follow through a very linear corridor, then you enter some arena, and you hide and kill endless enemies. Then you move a little bit, and you repeat. Sometimes you have situations when you need to fight with a knife against some monster, and in fact this episode is basically copy-pasted from one place of a game to another, so you have like 3 very similar fights with a monster, or maybe 2. A similar thing with the episodes when you need to kill enemies with a gun, because these are just identical episodes in different parts of the game, even locations are like 1-to-1 here. The game also features a stealth mechanic, but honestly, from my personal opinion, it would have been better if it wasn't here, because, well, I guess this clip would explain you everything. And now I will make a 180 flip discussing the gameplay of the Order, because there is actually something that has made the gameplay of the game something unique and making a very unusual experience, which actually made me to record this video. As I said, if you look at the gameplay directly, this is a very poor thing. But if you take a look at how the game is experienced in general, this is definitely something special. Because of the good directing, all the applied cinematic tools here, and a huge effort of the developers to create a seamless experience, you don't really feel like playing a game, because, you know, in games usually there are very distinctive parts when you play and when you watch cutscenes. Here, there is no this distinction. The entire game is a cutscene, and the entire cutscene is a game. There are a lot of cutscenes in the game, and they transfer to one another in a very seamless manner. Sometimes you really have an impression of watching a movie. There are cutscenes like maybe 10 minutes long. And then they transfer to gameplay in a very seamless manner, you just don't even recognize them. They are combined in such a way that you actually don't recognize when the cutscene happens and when the gameplay happens, because the gameplay may appear at any moment, as well as a cutscene. And this also works in an interesting manner with cutscenes and QuickTime events present there. I don't want to say this is something special, they just naturally blend in here and work into creating this very seamless experience of a movie. And all of that creates a very interesting impression, because I don't really remember anything like that. It seems like you watched something, but at the same time you were given controls for some parts with you being able to move and kill enemies. And you know, even interacting films like Heavy Rain, like Detroit, they don't feel like that. I honestly believe that The Order 1886 did a better job into immersing a player into the feeling of a movie. And I honestly wish it was all ideal like that. But unfortunately, all the efforts of the developers to make the game as cinematic as possible have completely neglected other parts of the game. It actually seems like developers have put all their efforts into making the game feel like a movie, and they completely forgot about all the other parts. In particular, I'm speaking about the plot and the story. The game takes a very interesting concept of the alternative reality and an order operating in London. And game actually features very interesting topic and themes. However, it completely fails to develop them. First of all, there is definitely a lack of context, because you are not even told what's going on in the world, why the world is like that, why the order exists, etc. Yeah, there are things you can pick up and read throughout the game, but honestly, they don't explain anything. There is definitely a lack of context and lack of information that needs to be given to a player to, at least resonate with things happening on the screen. Second thing, the complete failure on developing characters and their topic and themes. In the world of the game, the topics and themes are being told through the characters, and there are many potentially interesting storylines and topics that are just screwed up, like completely. You have some part of the story, the topic is being developed, and that's it. It just ends. Nothing here. Nothing in the future part of the game. The similar thing with the main story. The game starts quite actively, it's interesting to follow the story, but at some point it becomes just directionless. You're not given any information on the events, their motivation. For example, there is a rebellion in the game that you're completely not told about. What is their motivation? Why they're doing what they're doing? Like, the game tries to explain to you, but it's nothing. It's not like it should be here. I completely misunderstood what was the reason for the rebellion to do what they do, and actually the transition of the main character. Well, I don't want to say that it happens all of a sudden, it's just not really motivated and explained to you. And one of the problems that I mentioned in the beginning of the game is its length. Indeed, the game just finishes abruptly in the moment when you don't expect it, and you're just sitting and asking yourself, really? Is that all? Because the culmination that takes part prior to the end, you don't really feel like it to be a culmination. It is not what it should be here. You really expect the story to go on and to develop all the other topics and themes with other characters. For example, there is a very important part for the main character, his girlfriend or his wife, Izzy. It's a very serious topic with them having a conflict, and this is a very deep conflict that relies on the root parts of the order. But where is it? Where is its ending? Is there something about it? A similar thing with the end of the story. The character has changed, and it all implies that something is going to be further, that the character would deal with all the other things, with all the other topics that were developed before. But no, you just see the credits. It honestly feels like it could have been a very serious, profound story with interesting topics present. But it feels like at some point the development was cut and developers just needed to finish at what they have. The game just definitely lacks the length, and I feel like the story could have taken 15, maybe 20 hours, and that would be just an amazing thing to see. And the game actually implies that there is something to be further. There is actually a scene after credits, and it's just bizarre to realize that such a story was screwed in such way. Maybe there were ideas to continue the story in the second part. However, there is no second part in 10 years, and I don't think it would be ever released with the studio being dissolved in 2024. So probably this is just the end for it. And finishing here, I would like to say that I understand why in 2015 The Order 1886 caught such a negative reaction in the player community. The game obviously lacks on the content, and I don't think that the cinematic thing is something that would sell the game to most players, especially considering the fact that the game costed a full price back then, so it's $60 or something like that. It's just crazy to charge such a money for, I think, half or even 1/3 of a game. I personally can appreciate all the efforts and all the cinematic things about the game, but I realize that this is not a thing for many players. It's not what they expect. I personally think that the game was positioned and expected from the players as a cinematic Uncharted. However, it appeared a completely different experience, and I understand why people didn't like it. And of course, this won't be fair to judge the 10 years old game right now, but looking at the global scale, The Order 1886 was definitely a unique project. I honestly cannot remember any other game that blends the concepts and ideas of movies and the games in such a way, and I would say in such a natural way and the way it should be. And it's such a pity that developers couldn't make it all work together. Probably they failed with keeping the balance and honestly failing with their main idea and the concept they have. It's such a pity. I honestly wish I could see the finalized Order 1886, and I honestly think it would have been an amazing, great game. That's it. Nothing else to say.